There are countries that exist twice, once in the news and once in reality. And between those two versions, there is sometimes a gap 5,000 years wide. Iran is exactly that kind of country. In modern headlines, it appears as a geopolitical puzzle. Nuclear negotiations that collapse and restart. Sanctions that press but don't break. Regional proxy conflicts from Yemen to Lebanon. Protests on the streets of Tehran. A tension that never fully resolves, decade after decade. But here is what almost never makes it into that frame. The country that diplomats and military strategists argue about is the same land where 3,000 years ago, people carved underground rivers 70 kilometers long without a single pump. And those rivers still flow today. The same land where, in 539 BC, a king wrote the first known declaration of human rights in history. The same land where a medieval scholar created a medical textbook that was taught in European universities for 600 consecutive years. The same land where archaeologists lifted a golden eye from the dust of the Bronze Age, an eye 5,000 years old. Iran is not simply old, it is old at a scale that is genuinely difficult for the human mind to hold. The earliest traces of human presence on the Iranian plateau date back 100,000 years. In the caves of the Zagros Mountains, researchers have found Neanderthal remains and Middle Paleolithic tools. This means people lived on this land before modern humans had even reached most of Europe. When politicians argue about Iran across negotiating tables, behind them stands a civilization that survived Alexander the Great, the Arab conquest, the Mongol invasion, Tamerlane, and the colonial pressures of the 20th century. And each time, it did not merely survive. It absorbed its conquerors culturally and remained itself. That is the central key to understanding Iran, not as a threat, not as an ally, but as a civilization with a particular survival instinct, one sharpened across thousands of years of pressure, invasion, and reinvention. Today, we will not travel across the surface of this land. We will go deep into it, down to where underground rivers flow beneath the burning desert, down to where objects in Bronze Age dust outpace their own era by millennia, down to where a religious idea becomes a physical landscape, down to where a mountain fortress turns into a word that lives on in modern language. And we begin at the furthest point, with a city that no longer exists, but which looks back at us through a golden eye from 5,000 years of darkness. In the southeastern corner of Iran, in the region of Sistan and Baluchistan, around 3,550 BC, a city appeared. Its name today is Shar-e-Sukhteh, the burnt city. It did not receive that name from legend. It received it from the real traces of fire that archaeologists found in its soil. By its peak, around 2,800 BC, the city covered an area of 151 hectares. Tens of thousands of people lived here. It was one of the largest urban centers of the Bronze Age across the entire Middle East, a contemporary of the early Egyptian pharaohs and the Sumerian cities of Mesopotamia. The city survived 3 devastating fires and rebuilt after each one. After the fourth, it was abandoned forever, somewhere between 2350 and 2300 BC. Its inhabitants vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. The reason for the final collapse has not been established to this day. The city was discovered in 1967. Since the 1970s, Iranian and Italian archaeological missions have been excavating it, and each new decade adds something that overturns what we thought we knew. In a woman's burial, archaeologists found an artificial eye, a small sphere of resin covered in a thin layer of gold leaf with a painted pupil and capillaries made from the finest gold wire. It was inserted into her eye socket during her lifetime. Examination of the skull showed that the woman had worn this prosthesis for years. Traces of irritation around the socket confirmed long-term contact with the object. 5,000 years ago, the Bronze Age, customized prosthetic surgery. An object like this requires not just technical skill, it requires an understanding of anatomy, an aesthetic conception of the human face, and, almost certainly, speaks to the high social status of the person for whom it was made. Another famous find, a painted ceramic vessel decorated with sequential images of a goat reaching up toward a tree. 5 phases of movement arranged around the surface of the vessel so that when rotated, they create the illusion of animation. 5,000 years before cinema was invented, but the idea already existed. Also found at the Burnt City, the world's oldest known gaming board, complete with specialized dice, meaning board games were invented before most states existed. Surgical instruments and evidence of skull trepanation. The remains of large-scale textile production with thousands of spindles, objects made from lapis lazuli, brought from Afghanistan, and steatite from India. Direct proof of trade networks spanning thousands of kilometers. This city was not an isolated corner of the ancient world. It traded. It welcomed people from distant lands. It produced luxury goods. It thought with complexity, with attention to the human body, with a sense of beauty in motion. And here, in this dust, Iran asks its first great question. How early does the sophistication appear that we are accustomed to calling a late achievement? And are we wrong when we divide history into convenient stages of primitive and advanced? While Egypt was building pyramids and Mesopotamia was forming its first cities, a great civilization of its own was rising on the Iranian plateau, Elam. The Elamite civilization lasted several thousand years. It competed with Babylon and Assyria, traded with the Indus Valley civilization, warred and formed alliances with Sumer. The Elamites created one of the oldest writing systems in the region, Proto-Elamite script, which has still not been deciphered. Yes, one of the great writing systems of ancient Iran remains unread to this day. Thousands of tablets, 5,000 years of silence. Around 1250 BC, the Elamite king Untash-Napirisha ordered the construction of a sacred city, Dur-Untash, known today as Chogar Zanbil. At its center stood a ziggurat, a 5-tiered stepped tower that originally reached 50 meters in height. 3 concentric rings of walls surrounded it, creating a space of escalating holiness. The closer to the center, the more sacred the zone. Only the highest priests and the king could enter the innermost ring. But Chogar Zanbil matters most for what is absent from it. The city was never finished. Construction stopped after the king's death. It remained an uncompleted monument to a will that history stopped mid-sentence. In 1979, Chogar Zanbil became the first Iranian site listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This unfinished city is vital evidence. Long before the Achaemenids, 800 years before Persepolis, the Iranian plateau already hosted a mature civilization with sophisticated religious architecture, a concept of sacred space and imperial ambition. Persia did not emerge from nothing. It inherited a tradition, carried it forward, and raised it higher still. There are river civilizations, Egypt, Mesopotamia. There are sea civilizations, Greece, Phoenicia. But Iran became a civilization of scarcity, and that is precisely why its achievements are so astonishing. Because here, great things were born, not from abundance, but from absence. Around 3,000 years ago, on the Iranian plateau, the Qanat was born, an underground water gallery that delivered water from aquifers to settlements using nothing but gravity and precise calculation of gradient. At their peak, Iran contained more than 50,000 functioning Qanats. Some stretched 70 kilometers in length. Their combined length ran into hundreds of thousands of kilometers of underground tunnel, more than the distance from Earth to the Moon. And today, in the 21st century, thousands of them are still working, not as museum pieces, but as real, living infrastructure. In 2016, UNESCO inscribed 11 Persian Qanats on the World Heritage List, calling them an outstanding testament to cultural traditions in desert conditions. On the surface, the desert is silent, but viewed from above, a strange pattern becomes visible. Chains of evenly spaced circles running across the dry earth toward the horizon. These are the shafts, inspection wells that provided ventilation and access for maintenance. How was this possible without laser instruments, without satellite navigation? Builders calculated the tunnel's gradient by hand, using primitive levels and knowledge accumulated across generations. An error of 1/3 of a degree, and the water either would not flow at all or would destroy the tunnel from within. And yet they succeeded consistently for centuries. Specialist craftsmen called mokanis built and maintained these systems, passing their knowledge from father to son across dozens of generations. Traditional water law governed the distribution, strictly by time, strictly by communal rules. To violate those rules was not merely to break a contract, it was to threaten the very existence of your village. Think about this. Palaces burned, dynasties fell, armies vanished into the sand of history, but the water kept flowing underground, 3,000 years later. This is the first great lesson of Iran, a civilization of deep, invisible control, not of spectacle. It organized its environment for millennia to come, requiring no audience. In 550 BC, an event occurred that changed the course of history. Cyrus II, who would later be called the Great, overthrew the Median king Astyages and united all the Iranian peoples under his rule. Within a few years, he created something history had never seen before, the first truly multinational empire in the world. At its peak, the Achaemenid Empire stretched from the Balkans and Egypt to India and Central Asia. Its territory covered approximately 8 million square kilometers. It was home to between 40 and 50 million people, nearly half the entire population of the Earth at that time. Nothing like it had ever existed. But Cyrus astonished his contemporaries not only with the scale of his conquests, he astonished them with what he did after conquering. In 539 BC, his armies entered Babylon, essentially without a fight. Cyrus freed slaves, declared freedom of worship, and restored the rights of deported peoples. Among them, the Jews held in Babylonian captivity, whom he allowed to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. For this, Cyrus is called the Anointed of the Lord in the Bible, the only non-Jewish ruler ever given this title. His decree was written in cuneiform on a clay cylinder. The Cyrus cylinder is today held in the British Museum. Its provisions parallel the first 4 articles of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The text has been translated into all 6 official languages of the United Nations. Persia did what no other ancient conqueror had done. Instead of destroying conquered cultures, it incorporated them. Instead of enforced uniformity, respect for local religions and customs. Instead of imposing a single language, a multilingual administration. This was an empire built not only on the sword, but on the principle of managed diversity. That is why it lasted more than 200 years. Darius I went even further. He divided the empire into 20 to 30 satrapies with separated powers. He introduced special inspectors, the eyes of the king, who toured the provinces and reported directly to the center, bypassing local rulers entirely. This system of checks across administrative layers would thousands of years later become a model for state organization around the world. Darius also built the Royal Road, 2,700 kilometers from Susa to Sardis on the Aegean coast. 111 postal stations with fresh horses every 20 to 25 kilometers. Relay couriers covered the entire route in 9 days. On foot, the same journey took 90 days. The Greek historian Herodotus was so struck by this system that he wrote, "Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night prevents these couriers from completing their appointed journey." That phrase, 25 centuries later, became the unofficial motto of the United States Postal Service. On the plain of Fars, Darius laid the foundations of Persepolis, not a capital for daily governance, but a ceremonial center of the world. Once a year, on the day of Novruz, the Persian New Year, still celebrated by hundreds of millions of people today, delegations from all provinces of the empire came here bearing gifts. The broad, shallow staircase was designed so that you could ascend with dignity, slowly, almost in the rhythm of a procession. The Gate of All Nations, an entrance that literally named itself a gateway for the entire multinational world. The reliefs on the staircases showed 23 peoples bringing tribute: Libyans, Ethiopians, Indians, Greeks, Scythians, Arabs, all in traditional dress, all shown with dignity, not one depicted as a slave or a conquered enemy. This was a political program carved in stone. We are not the chaos of conquest. We are the architecture of order. We did not destroy you. We included you in ourselves. The Apadana, the audience hall of Darius, was supported by 36 columns, each 20 meters high. It held 10,000 people simultaneously. For its time, it was the largest covered space in the world. In the treasury of Persepolis, Alexander the Great found wealth so vast it took 20,000 mules and 5,000 camels to carry it away. Then he burned the palace complex. Some say it was revenge for the Persian burning of Athens in 480 BC. Others say it was a political statement, the symbolic killing of an empire through the destruction of its heart. Together with the palaces, religious manuscripts, archives, and centuries of accumulated cultural memory burned. One of the greatest acts of cultural destruction in the ancient world. And yet Persepolis survived the fire, because stone proved stronger than the conqueror. The columns still stand. The reliefs are still there. The staircases have not moved. Not far from Persepolis, at Nakshi-Rostam, the cliff faces bear the monumental tombs of the Achaemenid kings, Darius, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, carved high into the rock face, looking out across the plain forever. Nearby, Sasanian kings later carved their own triumphs into the same cliffs, layering their victories over those of their predecessors. The rock face became a palimpsest of Persian power across 1,000 years. The prophet Zarathustra founded his religion, by various estimates, somewhere between 1500 and 1000 BC. He was the first in known history to clearly articulate monotheism as a system, one supreme God, Ahura Mazda, embodiment of goodness, truth, and order, opposed by Angra Mainyu, the force of destruction and lies. The entire world is the arena of their struggle, and every human being has free will to choose a side. This sounds familiar? It should. Zoroastrianism passed to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam its core conceptual architecture. Monotheism in its mature form. Angels and demons as distinct beings. The day of judgment and resurrection of the dead. Heaven and hell as the outcome of moral choices made during life. The coming of a Messiah at the end of time. The final battle between good and evil. The very idea that history moves toward a conclusion and a triumph of justice. All of these ideas, in the form we know them today, pass through the Zoroastrian filter. Jews came into direct contact with these concepts during the Babylonian captivity, precisely when Cyrus the Great freed them in 539 BC. After that, biblical texts filled with new imagery that came from Iran. Under the Achaemenids, Zoroastrianism became the state religion of the First World Empire. Under the Sasanians, it became the state religion of a great power once again. Today, approximately 100,000 Zoroastrian Parsis remain in the world, descendants of those who fled to India to preserve their faith. Their sacred fire in certain temples has burned continuously for more than 1,000 years. In Yazd, one of the main living centers of Zoroastrianism, stands the Atash Behram Temple. According to tradition, its fire has burned without interruption for more than 1,500 years. In 2017, UNESCO inscribed Yazd on the World Heritage List. There are places where even the air seems cautious. Approaching the Dakmas near Yazd, a visitor feels exactly this. First, a dry slope. Then, a circular stone structure on the summit. Then, a strange silence. A dakma is a Zoroastrian burial tower. It was built high because the theology absolutely forbade contact between a dead body and earth, water, or fire. All three elements are sacred. Death is a source of ritual contamination. They cannot be mixed. The dead were laid on lattice platforms open to the sky. After the natural process was complete, the bones were gathered into a central pit, an ossuary. To modern sensibility, this sounds harsh. But in this practice, there is an internal logic of a world where the purity of the elements matters more than human habit, where death is not a private family event, but a cosmic question of order, where the body after death must return to the cycle of the world without causing harm to it. A dakma is metaphysics expressed in architecture, a form of belief, literally elevated to a hilltop, a religious idea made into landscape. This is one of the defining characteristics of Iranian civilization. Here, an idea rarely remained only an idea. Water became an underground canal, power became a stone terrace, death became a tower on a hill. What might elsewhere have remained a text became here a form visible from miles away. After the Achaemenids fell to Alexander, after the Greek Seleucids and the Parthian kings, in 224 AD, a new Iranian power entered the historical stage, the Sasanian Empire. It lasted more than 400 years, from 224 to 651 AD, and for almost all of that time, it existed in a state of war or intense confrontation with first Rome and then Byzantium. This was one of the longest geopolitical duels in the history of the world. 4 centuries, continuous confrontation between the two superpowers of their age. Neither side could destroy the other. In 260 AD, the Persian Shah Shapur I annihilated a Roman army at Edessa and captured the Emperor Valerian himself, alive, a living Roman emperor, taken prisoner. This was one of the greatest military shocks in Roman history. Shapur immortalized this moment in rock reliefs. They survive to this day at Nakshi Rostam, near Persepolis. The Sasanian state was not merely a military machine, it was a cultural phenomenon. Its capital Ctesiphon, on the Tigris River, became one of the largest cities in the world. The Arch of Ctesiphon, the throne hall of the Sasanian Shahs, had a span of 37 meters with no supporting columns whatsoever. It remains to this day one of the largest brick arches ever built in the world. The Sasanians conducted a Zoroastrian cultural renaissance. They systematized the sacred texts, created a state church with a hierarchy of priests, built a network of fire temples across the entire empire. Their court was a model of sophisticated ceremony. Sasanian silk, silverwork, and carpet weaving became prized across the known world. Their artistic vocabulary, the hunting king, the feasting noble, the combat of heroes, was absorbed into Byzantine, Islamic, and even Chinese artistic traditions. But in 651 AD, the Sasanian Empire fell, not to Rome, not to Byzantium, both of which it had outlasted, but to Arab armies carrying a new religion, Islam. In 651 AD, the last Sasanian Shah, Yazdegerd III, was murdered as he fled eastward. Zoroastrian Persia, a tradition of 1,000 years, seemed to have ceased to exist. But something happened that historians describe as one of the most remarkable cultural phenomena of the Middle Ages. Iran did not dissolve into the Arab conquest, it digested it. Within a few generations, Persians had occupied the key positions of the caliphate as administrators, scholars, poets, military commanders. When the Abbasids came to power in 750 AD, behind them stood primarily Iranian military and administrative force. The caliphate's capital was moved from Damascus to Baghdad, on land historically connected to Persia. Persian bureaucratic tradition became the backbone of the entire caliphate's administration. Something paradoxical occurred. The conquerors took the territory. The conquered took the culture. Arabic became the language of religion and science. But Persian became the language of poetry, diplomacy, and high culture from Istanbul to Delhi. Ferdowsi completed the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, in 1010 AD, 60,000 couplets, one of the longest epic poems in world literature. Written with almost no Arabic loanwords, a conscious act of cultural resistance. It is said that Ferdowsi, through this single poem, saved the Persian language from being absorbed into Arabic. Avicenna ibn Sina was born in 980 AD. His canon of medicine remained the primary textbook in European universities until the 17th century, more than 600 years. His works on philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and geology form part of the intellectual foundation on which modern science stands. Omar Khayyam, known in the West primarily as a poet, was first and foremost a mathematician and astronomer. In 1079 AD, he created a calendar more accurate than the Gregorian, the one the entire world uses today. Its margin of error was 1 day in 5,000 years. As a mathematician, he solved cubic equations and developed a method of geometric proof for them, 5 centuries before European mathematicians. Rumi, the Persian Sufi poet of the 13th century, is today one of the best-selling poets in the United States. His works have been translated into dozens of languages. His Masnavi, a spiritual poem of 25,000 couplets, is called the Persian Quran. He was born in what is now Afghanistan, lived most of his life in Anatolia, and wrote in Persian. 1 man, 3 countries, 1 language, 8 centuries of continuous readership. Iran did not merely survive the Arab conquest. It gave Islamic civilization its scientists, its poets, its architects, its philosophers, and it did all of this in its own language, preserving its own identity intact. High in the Alborz Mountains, in 1090 AD, Hassani Sabah seized the fortress of Alamut, not with an army, through gradual infiltration, by persuading the garrison from within, almost without bloodshed. This became the beginning of the Nizari Ismaili state, a political entity that lasted almost 170 years. Alamut controlled a network of mountain fortresses across Iran and Syria. Not a vast territory, but an extraordinarily effective structure of resistance that neither the Seljuks, nor the Crusaders, nor the great Sunni powers of the region could destroy. The Mongols demolished Alamut in 1256 under Hulagu Khan. The library of the fortress, described as one of the greatest libraries of the medieval world, was destroyed. What exactly it contained, we will never know. Arab and European chroniclers called the warriors of Alamut the Hashashin. From that word, European languages derived the word assassin, a professional killer. A mountain fortress in Iran gave the world's vocabulary a word that is still in use today. In 1220 AD, the armies of Genghis Khan entered Iran. What followed was one of the greatest demographic catastrophes in human history. Nishapur, one of the largest cities in the medieval world, a cultural center with a population of around 500,000 people, was annihilated completely. Merv, Balkh, Herat, the great cities of Islamic civilization, were reduced to ruins. By various estimates, Iran lost between 1/3 and 1/2 of its entire population. This is one of the highest proportional losses of any land conquered by the Mongols. But Iran survived even this. Within a few generations, the Mongol rulers of Iran, the Ilkhans, converted to Islam, learned Persian, and became patrons of Persian culture. Again, the conquerors took the territory. The conquered took the culture. In the 14th century, Persian poetry flowered once more. Hafez of Shiraz, arguably the greatest lyric poet of the Persian language, lived in precisely this era. His divan has been translated into hundreds of languages. Goethe dedicated his West Eastern divan to him. In Iran today, it is still customary to open Hafez's book at random and use the verse as an oracle, a practice that continues in the 21st century. Iranian architecture reasserted itself in the great monuments of the Ilkhanid and Timurid periods. The Jame Mosque of Isfahan, with construction spanning 12 centuries, embodies every major architectural period of Iranian history in its fabric. It is less a single building than a living archive of a civilization's evolution in brick, tile, and light. The Blue Mosque of Tabriz, the Sheikh Lotfollah Mosque of Isfahan, with its extraordinary tile work, the Friday Mosque of Yazd, with its twin minarets. Each is not just a place of worship, but a statement that Iran endures, that its craftsmen are still here, that beauty is a form of political fact. Iran today is a state with a nuclear program that keeps the international community in a state of sustained tension, a state against which some of the most severe economic sanctions in modern history have been maintained for decades, a state accused of supporting regional proxy forces from Hezbollah to the Houthis. In 2022, following the death of Mahsa Amini in the custody of the morality police, a wave of protests swept through Iranian cities under the slogan, "Woman, Life, Freedom." It became one of the largest social upheavals in modern Iranian history. The protests reached more than 150 cities. They were suppressed, with arrests, with violence, with sentences. But they revealed something that could not be suppressed. Beneath the surface of state control, there is a society with living, acute, unresolved contradictions. 85 million people live in Iran. Literacy exceeds 97%. More women attend university than men. This is an educated, technologically connected, culturally sophisticated society, caught between theocratic restrictions and the gravitational pull of the modern world. Historical Persia survived Alexander, survived the Arab conquest, survived the Mongol invasion that killed half its population, survived Tamerlane, survived colonial interference in the 19th and 20th centuries. Each time, it returned, not as a military victory, but as cultural inexhaustibility. The question that hangs over modern Iran is not whether the civilization will survive the current period. History suggests it will. The question is what form the survival will take, and who will define that form? The generation that remembers 1979, or the generation that was born 20 years after it? The country that wrote the first known Charter of Human Rights 2,500 years ago today sees its citizens take to the streets for basic freedoms. That is not a casual irony of history. That is a living, painful complexity, and it cannot be understood without the depth we have been tracing today. There is a pattern that runs through everything we have seen. The Khanate is invisible but endures 3,000 years. The sacred city at Choghazanbil is unfinished, but its form outlasts the dynasty that ordered it. The Cyrus cylinder is a few centimeters of clay, and it echoes in the founding documents of the United Nations. Zoroastrianism loses its empire, but seeds 3 of the world's major religions with its core ideas. Persian loses its state, but becomes the literary language of an empire that replaced it. Ferdowsi writes a poem in a conquered country in a nearly conquered language, and the language survives. Rumi writes in the 13th century and is read more widely in 21st century America than most contemporary poets. This is the Iranian model of continuity, not preservation behind walls, but transmission through form. The idea that if you encode something deeply enough, in architecture, in poetry, in engineering, in religious practice, it becomes harder to destroy than any army. Perhaps the central error of the modern view is that we want final answers from the past. We want ruins to explain themselves. We want artifacts to speak plainly. We want ancient practices to fit comfortably into familiar logic. But Iran exists differently. It answers not with direct meaning, but with echo. First, you see the desert. Then you discover that beneath it, 3,000 years ago, rivers were laid that still flow today. Then you climb to the columns of Persepolis and realize that the first Charter of Human Rights was written here. Then you learn that the concepts of angels, Judgment Day, heaven, and hell entered 3 world religions from this land. Then you stand at the Towers of Silence and understand that death can be made into architecture. Then you look at Alamut and see how a mountain fortress gave the world's vocabulary a word that endures. Then you read Ferdowsi and understand how a poem of 60,000 couplets saved a people's language from extinction. Then you open Rumi in a city on the other side of the world and realize he is still speaking. Then, from the dust of the burnt city, a golden eye rises, and the past looks back at you. And then Iran ceases to be merely a country on a map. It becomes a landscape of questions, a space where every object, every wall, every name is an entrance into a conversation that began before us and continues after us. Science explains much: the water, the dates, the architecture, the trade routes, the technologies, the political systems. But even when the explanation is found, what remains is a sense of scale. What remains is a cultural depth that resists summary. What remains is the strange feeling that before us is not simply the past, but another form of human greatness, a form we have not yet found adequate words to fully describe. Here, the wind touches columns that outlived their kings. Here, sand settles on the traces of cities that burned 3 times and 3 times rose again. Here, hillsides remember rituals that are no longer performed. Here, heights still carry the names that once made rulers tremble. The first charter of human rights, here. The first state postal system, here. The first known prosthetic, here. The first known animation, here. The first known board game, here. The religion that seeded 3 world faiths, here. The poet who saved a language, here. The scientist whose books taught European doctors for 600 years, here. The mathematician who built a more accurate calendar than the one the world uses today, here. And while heat shimmers above the deserts, while the Alborz Mountains hold their fortresses up against the clouds, while sunlight moves across the stone terraces of Persepolis, while an archaeologist's brush frees yet another fragment of a lost world from the dust, while young Iranians look toward the future across the walls of their past, Iran will remain the place where history does not end with knowledge. It ends with silence. That same silence in which an ancient land continues to keep its secrets.